Support for the nonprofit lab comes from initiative, the power or opportunity to act or take charge before others do. When you see a problem or opportunity in front of you, you don't just wait for someone to ask you to do something. You take charge and make it happen. Initiative, available within you as a response to almost every situation. Welcome to the Nonprofit Lab, a podcast dedicated to the ongoing discovery of how we can all be a part of bigger social change through the lens of the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Puya Porak. I'm an industrial engineer, human-centered designer, and CEO of MatchNice, a social impact tech startup with a mission to connect the nonprofit ecosystem and maximize social impact. Thanks for joining us on our startup journey as we look to uncover and shake up the status quo in the world of nonprofits. My guest today is Allison Cousins, an educator and multifaceted entrepreneur living in St. Louis, Missouri. She grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, where she attended the University of Alabama, competing in volleyball throughout her college career. Passionate about sports and education, Allison launched her early career into education and coaching. In 2018, through her work as a physical education teacher and athletic director at Lafayette Preparatory Academy, a school educating youth from kindergarten through eighth grade, Allison recognized a gap in the availability and access to sports and extracurriculars in her school and in the St. Louis charter school system. Allison was committed to and dedicated to take action and launched St. Louis City League, a nonprofit on a mission to develop the next generation of youth through engagement in school sports. Founded in 2021, City League partners with middle schools in St. Louis to reduce the barriers for schools to sustainably develop and implement school sports programs like basketball, volleyball, soccer, and cross country. Schools are facing teacher shortages and funding cuts while consistently being called upon to meet increasing social, emotional, and learning needs of students. City League seeks to reduce the barriers for schools to provide high-quality school sports and extracurricular activities for St. Louis's 9,000 middle school students. Allison is also the CEO of a St. Louis tech startup, Approach Dating, a new kind of dating app to find your person in person. In this episode, we cover a lot of topics from the perspective of a leading edge grassroots nonprofit and leader, including the power of building traction and measuring impact to build trust with your community, how to communicate impact and vision in a case statement and on your website, the importance of networking with values and mission aligned community members as a founder, creating clarity on your target donors and segmenting them based on passion and interest, what it looks like to set up a new donor management system, lessons learned in board management as a new nonprofit leader, social media strategies for how to start, be consistent, and build a following, creating our roadmap towards a sustainable funding and development strategy, and explore the overlaps between startup tech and nonprofits from a founder who lives in both worlds. So let's jump into my interview with Allison. Allison Cousins, welcome to the Nonprofit Lab. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm great. How about yourself?
I am doing well. We just got a new puppy, so if there's like a pause, we might have to do a little extra editing, but I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
We also got a puppy, so we'll have to get him together for a play date.
Yes, yes. And that is possible because we both live in the city of St. Louis. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can talk about City League, the mission, how it got started, where you are now.
Sure, thanks. Thanks again for having me. Yes, I'm an educator by background, kind of always saw my path to be a teacher and coach, and really lived that out until somewhat recently. And my entrepreneurial spirit somewhat took over and started two ventures, actually, one of them being City League, which is the nonprofit, which is focused on developing kids through the vehicle of sports. And yeah, I'm just really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful to know you and work alongside you. So thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And for our audience, I've actually had the privilege of working with Allison since what did we say? Like August of last year is when we met, and I've been involved with supporting some of your online fundraising strategy and overall fundraising strategy. So we have gotten to know each other, and it is amazing that you're a dual founder. And it's kind of proof that starting a nonprofit is hyper entrepreneurial in itself. But yeah, you're kind of a rare breed in that you've also started another startup. Can you tell us a little bit about Approach, and then maybe we can weave in some of the lessons that you've learned from that startup into your nonprofit journey?
Sure. So Approach is actually a dating app. So I went through a divorce back in 2019, 20. And again, it was just like identified a really big problem and realized that it was much bigger than myself, and came up with a creative solution to mitigate a lot of the um, frustrations and anxieties around online dating. And so I built an app that connects people in person at local businesses and events so that people can gauge chemistry safely and efficiently and authentically over a shared interest. So I'll be happy to talk more about that later. And there's so many components to that business and venture that have really led me to make City League so much more successful. And so really grateful for the experience in both. And yeah, every day is a learning experience.
For sure. And you know, like there's so many applications of what you're doing with the approach, and like the concept of dating apps and philanthropy, which I think we're going to be seeing more of, like this Tinderization of donations and engagement with volunteers and donors. And I think I've got some great future guests coming on that will dive deeper into that topic. So you bringing that up is like a nice little tip of the iceberg on that. So let's get back to your nonprofit, City League. Um, what was the initial inspiration for you starting it, and like how do you like tell us about like the vision that you had, and how did you go from having this grand vision to taking your first step?
Sure. I think to best explain to the listeners, I think providing a little bit more context around the landscape in St. Louis right now, particularly in the education system where this all blossomed out of. So the charter school movement in St. Louis started 10, 15 years ago when SLPS lost accreditation. And there was a lot of um, educational leaders that came together and said, we can build great schools without having to operate within this systematic umbrella of a public school system. And so that's really how this movement started. And most charter schools start as a single grade level, so as a kindergarten class, and then the following year they're K1, K1, 2. And so my first year as a teacher in one of the charter schools in St. Louis City was its first full year as a full built out kindergarten, K through 12, K through 8, excuse me, middle school. And so, the start of City League really blossomed out of kind of investigating what options there are in the city for middle school charter school athletic programs. And, we looked around at like what's available, who do we play, what leagues exist that we can participate in. And it came down to there's a lot of barriers for our families: cost, transportation, really kind of like the systematic infrastructure that didn't exist, and nobody knew where to start or how to go about like launching programs. And so networked with a lot of the other charter schools who are in the same phase of growth, fully built, hadn't yet added programs. And again, it's like that first step in an entrepreneurship journey where you're making sure that you're not the only one with the problem. And so, and then it pivots to, okay, now what is the solution? And the solution was, do we participate in these other leagues? Why don't we? Again, those barriers. cost, transportation, infrastructure. So what is our other option? And the other option really came down to, let's create one. And so I, with the support of Lafayette Preparatory Academy, the school that I was currently working for, launched a league and worked to support 10 other charter schools in the city to build sustainable, robust, high quality athletic programs. And so the first year and a half, including a COVID year, we operated out of Lafayette Preparatory Academy, and that was a portion of my responsibilities there. And really quickly kind of realized this is much bigger than the time and resources that I was able to give it while I was still teaching a full-time load, and I was the athletic director of our elementary and middle school. So made the choice, and somewhat a leap of a faith, to transition into a nonprofit, and just said, this is so impactful and meaningful for so many kids and schools, communities in the city, and truly has the potential to transform not just the lives of the individual kids in the city, but the whole city school landscape. And so for me, I was in a position personally that leap the time was right to do that. And it was something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and just made the decision to do it. So we transitioned into a nonprofit this past summer, and really kind of dove deep into all the foundational pieces of building a nonprofit, building your board, developing your board. I mean, I'm sure you know and can speak to the complexity of building a robust and really high quality organization that has a really clear vision, and kind of building the building blocks along the way to get to that end vision.
Well, I'm so glad that you made that decision, because from that point of even deciding to go after this idea, this impact for bringing school sports back to St. Louis in the midst of kind of the loss of accreditation in the public school system, and then like funding, transport, all the barriers that you mentioned, you've had a significant impact and outcome on the space since you started. Tell us about some of the impact and outcomes that you have created.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we're now working with 13 different schools, 10 of which we helped launch programs at. The other ones had some sort of existing program, whether it was a sport or two, or a full program. In our first year, we served over more than 600 kids across 4 different sports. We are really proud that in our first year, 87% of our participants tried a sport for the first time at the middle school level. So it really speaks to just access and opportunity to try something new, and encouraging kids to step outside of their comfort zone. And then there's just so many intangible results that come out of that and blossom out of that.
So I'm still like really intrigued by how you went from having this idea to getting to that initial space of impact. And you talked about how it's very much like a startup. Like, you had to validate that the problem was there. You had to do some of the market validation and actually talk to some of the schools and the parents. Can talk a little bit about what that process was like with kind of when you initially had this idea and you were pitching, like, well, here's the options, and how did you build the buy-in around the vision for your nonprofit before even kind of founding it?
I think I was in a unique position because I was operating through my role at the school that I was currently working at Lafayette Prep Academy. And so I had the connection, one, to our customer base, so you might call it, if you were in a for-profit, but in the nonprofit landscape, like, these are the people that we are working with and serving, right? And so I had this direct connection with all of these people that we are now going to be including in our league, and really just it was through conversations with families, through school leadership. I had the opportunity to work with the Missouri Public Charter School Association, and got in front of a lot of different school leaders. And our program requires the schools to invest into our programming, meaning they need to appoint someone as an athletic director or program director, and they need to commit to following through and in order for those programs to be developed at a high level. And so really it was just like getting out ahead and networking and building relationships with school leaders that fully validated and allowed us to take that leap from this is a great idea to, okay, we are all doing this together and we're ready to actually make it happen.
That's so cool. One of the recurring themes around this question when I asked, like, well, how did you even decide to start up your nonprofit? Like, how did you see the opportunity? Like, how did you get to where you are? It's almost always an individual in a position seeing an opportunity and kind of already doing the work and then being like, oh, well, we could do this. Like, we can do this. And then building the organization around it. So I commend you for being one of those leaders and seeing that opportunity and taking the action. What are some of the maybe like bigger challenges that you experienced early on in starting a nonprofit that, like, if you could go back to when you first started, that you might tell yourself, like, hey, Allison, watch out for that?
Well, thank you first for the compliment. I think everything in the nonprofit landscape just takes time and it is so data driven. And so, we were really in a place of advantage because we had operated and had a year's worth of data, a year and a half's worth of data before we made this transition into the nonprofit space. And so, when you're applying for grants, when you're talking to donors, they're like, well, where's your credibility? How do I know that this is going to make an impact? Who are you impacting? How many kids are you serving? Well, we can say we're already doing this work now because we've existed within the other organization for a year and a half, and we have this data. We have the metrics that support, how our programs are impacting kids and school communities and families. Whereas, had we just started as a nonprofit and we're like, all right, we're going to launch first year's program, applying for a grant would look very different. And so, I think looking back at myself a year and a half ago, just telling myself like it will take time, like everything that you do needs to be measurable, and it is all about the people you are serving and the people that are involved in your organization. In every conversation that I have, I try to weave in a story about somebody who was impacted by a program, a school that was changed or transformed, or there's so many different touch points in our programming and the ways that it transforms communities that it's missed opportunity if you don't interweave those stories into conversations, into this impact measurement.
Yeah, and just like a startup, what you're talking about is building traction, right? To find investors, to connect with donors, with grant foundations, with grant opportunities. And I love that you're underscoring this importance of measurement and quantifying impact, and the storytelling is so incredibly important as part of this. So how do you envision measurement like evolving and continuing at City League? How did you approach building your measurement program?
It's a great question. So we have 4 programs, 4 sport seasons, and at the conclusion of each program, we survey the parents and the athletes that participate. And so our biggest differentiator from any rec sports program is that we are school focused. And so we're looking at the development of the whole individual, whereas, we want kids to be able to dribble the basketball and we want kids to know how to serve the ball with fundamental skills. But at the core of it, we want to develop the kid as a human, and we want those kids to excel academically in the classroom. We want them to have feelings of confidence and self-worth. We want kids to have great behavior and like opportunities to be a leader in school. And we want them to have growth in their relationships with their peers. And so we survey and measure that through our relationships with our participants at the end of every program. And the data really speaks for itself, that we're showing growth. We're showing that kids are participating in different sports for the first time, whereas, we're giving them an opportunity to step outside their comfort zone. So it's really like building and maintaining those relationships with the families, but also consistent measurement and making sure that we're collecting that data, because it's so important. Because if without it, that's really truly where funding often comes from, is being able to say, like, this is how many kids we served and this is how we're impacting these kids. Whereas, at the core of it, we want to just see kids thrive and develop and, take what they learn from their experience in sports and apply it to all aspects of their lives.
Yeah, what I really appreciate about what you just said in terms of the kind of outcomes that you're looking to drive, at its surface, City League bringing youth sports to youth is for sure like the point of entry, but really the mission is all about development and supporting, like you said, the whole human, the whole child, the kid, and the fact that you have defined all of these other attributes that you're looking to support and foster in the community beyond just how many kids were dribbling basketballs or serving volleys or how many miles did our kids run in cross country. You're looking at these much larger kind of outcomes. So how are you building that bridge to looking at the number of kids that you have created access for sports to then seeing like maybe the influence that you might be having in these much larger areas? And as someone that works with you, I know it ties back to how you're doing your measurement, but tell us about that.
So we are measuring the growth of our participants through surveys, and it's really truly a perceived growth from the lens of a parent and from a student, which is, we're providing them the opportunity for this self-awareness and this mental, personal check-in within themselves and within their family members to say, am I turning in all my assignments every week in a way that I wasn't, previous before basketball season started? If somebody's checking my grades every Tuesday and I can't play the game on Wednesday, am I going to study for my test on Friday? Absolutely. And so, that's just one example of the way that we ask our students to measure their academic success. Is there a change in behavior? And is it being reflected in their academic outcomes, their grades? And then the same kind of applies through the different other pieces we measure, and including the relationships with peers, confidence, self-worth, and their behavior and leadership in schools.
Amazing. Well, what's really powerful, like you said, about having this data is being able to approach funders and really the community. And as you're looking to scale and grow the program with these really powerful stats that are not just qualitative, the numbers really matter. You want the quantitative as well as the qualitative, but the qualitative, I think, is where like the emotional connection happens, right? Like our logical brain loves to see like, oh, we're in this many schools and we're serving this many hundreds of kids, and this percentage of kids participated in a sport for the first time. But can you tell us like a story that maybe like brings to life the impact of the mission at City League, and how that has maybe supported your conversations with potential partners and donors?
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories about one of the schools that we're working with to build the sustainable programming is Kairos Academies, and they're a 5th through 9th grade now, so they have a middle school and just started a high school. But they started their volleyball program last year, and to start the year, they don't have a gymnasium. So a lot of charter schools exist out of pre-existing buildings. They operate out of an old publishing house. It's a really unique school infrastructure, but one of the downsides is they don't have facilities. And so for lack of other resources, they were practicing volleyball on the blacktop and like serving the ball against a brick wall. Above this line would be above the net, and like that is what you have to do because that's all that you have access to at the time. And so developed relationships with another organization in the city that has a facility, and they are now during the season we're then practicing in the new gymnasium. And the amount of progress that was then shown once they had access to adequate facilities and adequate equipment just really speaks to, like, it is really about access. And so one of our longer term visions is to provide a facility and an access point with high level fundamental and foundational training. And so that story, and as an example, really speaks to, it's all about access. It starts with access, and then it continues with that access to the quality of fundamental training and then development beyond that. So that's a good story. We had another family member share a testimony about a runner who has special needs and had never been able to participate in any sports prior to our league. And honestly, they just could not stop talking about how helpful it was for their peer relationships. It was the first place for this kid to really find like an identity and develop relationships and have the confidence and feel prideful. And the amount of social and emotional growth that happened through that experience was just something that was transformational for that kid. And stories like that truly make you feel and experience in yourself how this program is living its mission out through the programs.
It also underscores this importance of partnerships in the communities that you serve, right? Like Chandler, my wife, is a clinical psychologist, and for sure, the children that she provides therapeutic services to have it's much easier when the parent is supportive and involved as well. So it's great that you've created this opportunity for not just the kids, but also the parents and the coaches and the school to really wrap around and provide the necessary support systems for ultimately the kids to thrive. So I think that's a really, really powerful example. And I love those stories. And I know you have so many more. And one of the cool things that we did together was actually translate some of these anecdotes and quotes and all of the stats into building City League's case statement. Talk about kind of like the process of what the case statement meant for you guys and how you're using it now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It was a very transformational moment, I think, and it's a resource that our organization uses now. It really demonstrates the heart of what we're doing through the data measurement, through the testimonies, and through our early, successes in terms of our relationships with some of the other organizations that are supporting us now. At the heart of it, it's a really brief document that explains at the core of what our mission and what our programs are, what the potential for the transformation to be, the potential impact, and then validates it through what we're already doing, right? So we're already in 13 different schools. We have partnered with the Opportunity Trust and received a grant. We've been selected by Four Hands, which is a local brewing company, actually, but they have a really philanthropic initiative called Citywide, and they're supporting our organization and our program participants through that initiative. And so it is a valuable resource. We use it as a leave behind when we talk to prospective donors, to foundations. It really has everything about our organization in one succinct document that clearly articulates our vision for where we want to go. It clearly articulates what we're doing right now and how we're doing it, and gives the tangible data around the impact. And that's and it's kind of cute too. It's fun to look at, and there's lots of pictures of the kids, which is really important because people need to see that.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good looking case statement. And like you said, it's this highlight of the mission, the impact, your vision, and kind of the roadmap of where you're going, and the proof points around the quantitative and qualitative feedback, and then kind of a hook into how to get back in touch with you. And I love that you emphasize that it's also a leave behind, right? Like you're not going into meetings with potential donors or partners and saying, like, let's walk through this document together bullet by bullet. You're focusing on the relationship and the connection, and then leaving that as like a, hey, here's some additional information, looking forward to catching up. And it's great that you've already been able to create some of these partnerships, using that kind of a relationship focused approach. So can you talk about some of, go a little bit further into the partnerships that City League has created and the importance of partners and the success of your mission?
Absolutely. Yeah, the first and foremost, we consider all of our schools partners, and that is just without the support and the investment from our schools, like our programs won't be effective. And so we consider those our primary partners because, like I said, they are most important, and they are the ones that have the closest touch point to our families that we're serving. And beyond that, we developed a relationship with Four Hands, which is all, I will be really transparent. It's all through networking, right? So being able to share your story and find people who are passionate about whatever it is that you're doing, right? St. Louis, fortunately, is a sports city. There's so many people here that have a heart for sports. There's so many people that their lives were changed through their experience growing up playing sports, or they had a coach or a mentor, and it's relatable. And when you hear that there's a lot of kids in the city that don't have that experience or don't have the opportunity to have some of the things that you had when you were growing up, you're like, well, that's a problem. I want to be a part of it, and I want to be part of that change. And so many of the relationships that we're developing have come through connections like that. It's all about finding people that are passionate about your mission. And it has been amazing. I've made some of the most wonderful connections, and I think St. Louis is really unique in that St. Louis loves to support St. Louis like no other city I've been a part of. And I think our mission is really true to like the core of the city as well. And so it's been a wonderful process for me. I remind myself often of what I said earlier of it takes time, and those relationships take time. You can't go into a first meeting, asking for a major gift. It's really just getting to know people and at the heart of, what they're passionate about and what they want to leave behind as a legacy.
Yeah, I know St. Louis is among the top most volunteeringest in the country. And I also appreciate the focus on your target donors and supporters, right? Like you have a very clear mission and you've done the work to say, okay, well, here is the type of person that would be interested and connect with our mission and would be interested in supporting us, whether that's through other connections or financially or serving on a board or whatever that is. And I think that definition of kind of the persona of your ideal supporter and donor is a really important and fundamental step to take as you're defining an overall fundraising strategy. And I'll raise my hand to myself on this one. Like we connected immediately because when you told me about the mission at City League, I was like, oh, I used to volunteer at Beat the Streets, another youth sports organization. Wrestling, football was instrumental in my own growth and development in middle and high school. And like, yeah, I want to do everything I can to create that same opportunity. So kudos to you for like having all that definition. But then I think it's one thing to do it on paper. And I think this is like a case statement as a perfect example of this. Like it's great to have that on paper, but the real work happens in making those connections and doing the networking. And I think you said this earlier, like the one of the biggest things that you recognized was the patience that it takes, right? Like the first meeting is never the ask, especially for major gift donors, where you're like, hey, can you check, cut me a check for X amount or whatever that is. So all of that and just a big yes. And translating this idea of knowing who your target is, the idea around your case statement. When we first met, you were in the process of launching a new website for City League. I have seen a lot of different nonprofit websites. I think yours is one of the best. Talk about the process and the investment that you made in the St. Louis City League website.
No, that's a great segue. It truly ties into audience, right? So you have your profile of the people who are going to support your mission, and then when you're building a website, you have to look at the audience who's looking at your website, right? So our audience is kind of threefold, right? So we have the people who want to support City League, right? So our donors are people in the community that want to learn more about our organization. We have our participants. So those are our parents that are like, hey, where do I go to find the schedule? And then we have our schools and our athletic directors who are like, hey, I want to get involved, or I need to see policy or X, Y, and Z. And then another layer of that is we have our officials who also can, utilize our website for tools as well. And so we have a variety of audiences. So we had to be very strategic when we were building the website to make sure that all of the different information was very clear about who the context was directed towards and how to use it. And so at the core of who I am as a person is transparent and like simplicity and efficiency. And so there's nothing more on the website than needs to be on the website, because it just dilutes into confusion and oftentimes people lose interest. And so again, I spent a lot of time. We actually had a board member donate the services, paid for the website to be launched, which was just absolutely so generous. And I worked with 2 female consultants who started their own website development businesses, and they were absolutely phenomenal to work with, and clearly had just a wealth of expertise in the nonprofit sector and just the website development piece of it. But again, we had to really take a high level step back, evaluate our audience, and decide like what's the most pertinent information that these people need to see, and then how can we visually present it in a way that is appealing and speaks to our mission. And so we established our tone and our brand and our voice all through those conversations of the website development.
Yeah, and you all really hit it out of the park with the website. For our audience, you should definitely check it out. It's stlcityleague.com. And I love that you basically did exactly to the T what my previous guest, David Paseric, who has helped hundreds of different nonprofits launch websites, do, which is, one, understand who your audience is, and then cater and build the content in a way that creates an emotional connection and is most useful to them and is easy to navigate, which I think your website is, as part of just like the core foundation and framework of how you're building it. And I love that when you land on your homepage, you see exactly what the mission is, the quick background of your organization, as well as the current impact that you're creating. And the menu bar is very clear, like you said, easy access to, depending on who you are, the persona, whether you're a parent or a donor or a potential partner, very easy to navigate. So kudos to you all again on that. I think it's a great example of a really solid website plan for a nonprofit.
Thank you.
One of the things, Allison, that me and you have been working on recently is identifying and working to set up a new donor management system. So I'd say like a newer nonprofit, almost grassroots, but not quite. You guys have done a lot of amazing work and impact. How do you see the importance of moving into the space of having a donor management system versus kind of like I think what a lot of nonprofits are doing, the smaller nonprofits in particular, are kind of working out of contact books or spreadsheets when it comes to donor engagement or participant management, et cetera. How do you see the importance of this shift that we're making to a donor management system?
Well, I'm going to first quickly name drop and just say that I'm so grateful we were able to attend a fundraising boot camp hosted by Let's Build Hope organization, which is local here in St. Louis. And I feel just so grateful that we had the opportunity to engage in this workshop and have this information at the start of our journey, because we're setting ourselves up and creating systems and executing these systems now at this early phase where we're building our base of supporters and donors and people who are engaging in our programming. And we're not 30 years in and we have all these crazy records and we don't know what to do with them and who X, Y, and Z are. So I'm just really grateful for that experience and the major takeaways that we had out of that. And it truly is setting up systems and workflows that create efficiency in this tangible connection that you want to be out in the community. So it's making sure that it's for accountability, right? So anybody in our organization can engage in this. Maybe it's our board members or some of our volunteers, but it's creating consistent touch points to these people who want to be supporters and be involved in our organization, and having a place to, it's a database, so having a place to house it and to have access to it in an efficient way. And like I said, I think transitioning out of spreadsheets at the time that we are, you have to start somewhere. And I think we're at this like pivotal moment now where, in order to grow and to set ourselves up for success through living out our vision, it's the best decision for our organization, but also just for the future.
Yes, and I am grateful to be a small part of that. And one of the things I'm most excited about is, like you said, kind of the scaling factor and being able to empower the incredible community of supporters and team members behind you and the City League vision and mission to also participate in kind of that growth from a fundraising perspective. You mentioned Let's Build Hope, and I'm really hoping to have Linda B. Haley from Let's Build Hope, an incredible human being, join me on the podcast in the future as well. What were some of the other biggest takeaways that you had that you're applying now from that 5-day fundraising boot camp?
I think the biggest and most applicable for where we are right now is really board development. So we intentionally started our board at 3 people because as we're building this foundation, it's really hard to develop policy and to develop infrastructure when you have a lot of people in the room. And so we intentionally started really small so that we can kind of get through some of the nuts and bolts of just the foundational component, and the resources, the templates, and just the experience that they shared through this process of board development, and identifying who do you want on your board and how do you create the best board and how does your board operate and how do you engage your board in ways that they feel like they're living out their passions and they're able to serve in their highest capacity. And again, the timing was perfect for this opportunity, and that's among many of the other components that we covered in the week-long class, was the most applicable for where we are as an organization, because that was truly what we've identified as like, it's time to grow. Now we know how to do it, and we know how to do it setting ourselves up for success long term.
Yes, and board development is, I think, a whole topic on its own, and it was really great to see that kind of was its own dedicated session. And I can attest to the way that you all are applying all that knowledge is certainly impressive and working well. So I'm excited to see that continuing to grow for City League. We were recently hanging out, Allison, and you had your phone out and you were scrolling through the City League Instagram, and you're like, hey, check this out. Tell us about the recent success that you've been having with your social media, how you're engaging the community, the excitement that's brought for you and the organization.
Oh, I love it. That was fun. So I'm just going to start by saying the word consistency. I actually worked with a consultant, Kevin Lashley, who also works with the St. Patrick Center. And, he was like, just post something, like, just be consistent, like he would attest to this conversation that we had. And I was like, I know, I need to. And so I've upped my Instagram game, and now I routinely post, the weekly game schedule, and then I do a highlight reel at the end of every game with some cool audio. And I noticed after a couple of weeks, we started getting some pretty significant traction. Like, all of the kids that follow City League are now sharing the schedule. They're reposting it on their stories and circling their game time and saying, see you there, come support us. And then all of a sudden now all of our gyms are like absolutely packed. We're like, we will need to be careful the fire marshals don't show up, kind of thing. Good problem to have, but a problem, And then, as I started seeing this engagement, these kids are like DMing the City League account, like, hey, can I get on the highlight reel? And I'm like, well, I'm one person. I'm trying to get around to 3 different gyms in one night, and kind of just came to the realization of like, these kids that aren't getting highlighted, like, they want to be featured. They want to have their moment to shine. And so I was thinking about like, okay, what's another way that we can get more kids and to feel proud of what they're doing through their sports and for their school. And so I created a Instagram challenge where we're going to do an Instagram takeover. So one team, I'll go feature them and get a lot of cool video and interview them. And, I'll have a whole feature section on them. So that's coming up next week. But I created a contest, and it was as simple as like this post, follow City League, and then make your vote in the comments. And we got 300 and some votes, and I think I got like 150 new followers, and it's just creating engagement, right? So we're engaging the new members of the community. One particular thing I thought was so awesome was that we had kids voting for schools that are not yet in our league, which just speaks to the fact that like kids are now aware of this happening and they want to be a part of it, and so I love that. It was great engagement. Next week I'm going to a couple different practices and gonna execute the Instagram challenge, so I'm excited to see that come to life. But at the core of it, like, these kids want to be featured, they want to have an opportunity to shine and be proud of it, and they should be, because they're awesome kids.
And it's a brilliant strategy. You're creating the hype and awareness and motivation and inspiration that supports your mission and everything that you're doing across the different sports and the programming that you're doing. As a founder myself, I can attest to social media management is a significant investment of your time and resources. How did you go from, oh, this is a lot, to like, okay, I'm going to do this? Can you tell us about like your routine? And I love that you highlighted consistency. That's very, very important. How did you set yourself up for success in executing kind of this vision? And to your kudos, one of the stats you didn't mention is like one of the last reels that you made on Instagram that like had close to or over 15,000 views, and that's pretty solid from going to like from 0 to 15,000. So yeah, but how do you do it? How did you approach it?
Well, on a personal level, like one of the things that I'm looking to improve is, again, consistency and follow through. And so I actually just created a social media timeline, right? So on Monday, I create the graphic for the games that are coming up on Wednesday. Those get shared routinely throughout the next 2 days. On Wednesday night, I go take the video footage of the games. And then on Friday night, when all the kids are on their social media accounts and all the families are like looking for, you're settling in to watch a movie, that seems like what we've learned is the prime time to make that post. We roll out the highlight reel. And so it's just kind of, it's setting a schedule for yourself and creating the content ahead of time if you can. So I can make the schedule posts for, the remainder of the season in one sitting. And again, like, I save audios for the reels that I make ahead of time, so that when I sit down to do it, it's actually, a lot more streamlined and quicker. So it's a lot of learning as I go, but again, consistency and just executing on it. Once you do it, people will follow.
Yeah, having a plan and defining a plan and a schedule, I think, is really important to that, and helpful even for me, like someone that has to produce a lot of the content for Match Nights and the podcast, and we've got a lot of guests scheduled, like making sure that the right sequence of events, and then holding yourself accountable to those things. And speaking of other startups, I want to come back to one of the first questions I asked you, which was, your role at as a founder at Approach Dating. How has that role in kind of the for-profit space as a founder, tech startup founder, influenced your approach, pun intended, at City League?
That's a great question. I can honestly say I wouldn't be where we are now in City League without this experience that I was able to directly apply to the nonprofit sector. And there's so many, similarities and pieces of overlap in terms of building a business. And part of my vision for City League is to be sustainable. And most nonprofits rely vast majority of their funding from the philanthropic initiatives. And one of the pieces of my vision for City League, and this is one of the biggest takeaways that I took from this roadmap vision from Approach, is that, like, we can't be at our end goal next year. And so we actually created a roadmap where we're saying, like, this is how much capital we need to raise in order to run our programs in the way that we want to run them for the next 2 years. And so we have our phase 1. And then phase 2, it looks a little bit different. We need to raise this much capital. This is what our, who we're employing and how those people are working within our organization. These are the amount of kids that we'll be serving at this point. And this is what we need in order to do that. And then here's phase 3. This is this next phase. And so this is very similar to a startup in that, like, you can't like overnight go from an idea to a product and it being, in the hands or fingertips of millions of people. And so saying, here's phase one, here's phase two, and then like, what is it going to take within each of those phases in terms of capital, in terms of, people, and in terms of product, in this case, programs, and being able to articulate that in a way that people understand it and are passionate about this vision, right? So I spoke earlier about the need for access to facilities and equipment and high quality coaching and really consistent programming, right? And so like that is part of my end vision, is because we've identified that as a problem, but we can't just expect to purchase or open or rent or lease a building and have multiple gyms, next year. So what is it going to take to get there? That is honestly the biggest takeaway and the most applicable piece of the startup vision. There are just so many components that overlap. The networking component, identifying who are the key people that you need to know in St. Louis and that would have a passion for this mission, and how do you get to them? How do you get a meeting? How do you, get an introduction to a meeting? So I feel fortunate that I have kind of both lenses that I can apply, and there's pieces of the nonprofit sector that I bring to approach as well, because it's so much about relationships, and at the core of it, it's people are driven by passion, and if they see that you are living that passion out through the initiative that you're working on, then most people want to get behind it.
Sustainability, yes, 100%. And it's incredible that that has been, and so many other factors of just this new wave and approach to nonprofit leadership, founding, management is part of the core of City League and how you all are approaching the development and scaling of your mission and organization. And it gives me, and I think a lot of listeners, the hope that, oh gosh, like all these kind of status quo practices in the sector, that there are leaders like yourself, new nonprofit founders that understand these issues and have been made aware of these issues through various support networks and are taking action to be part of this wave of change. So thanks for being one of the leading edge nonprofits on that front, Allison.
Well, thank you.
So you've got a lot going on. You're a mom of two, a pup, a startup, a City League. What is it that keeps you going?
It is a true passion for both of the initiatives that I'm working on. When work doesn't feel like work, there are times that it does, but for the vast majority of my day and the time that I spend investing in building these two businesses, I love it. And because I love it and the passion is there, it doesn't feel like work. And that gives me energy, and I can bring that to my family. It gives me joy to share with my children. And I know that I'm building something that is going to, build a better life for my family and my kids. And I'm a better human being because I enjoy the work that I'm doing. And so that translates into my relationship with my kids and my partner. And it's all about balance. There are definitely days when I go to sleep with my mind turned on and I'm like, oh, I should probably write that down for tomorrow. And there are things that don't get finished on all my long lists of agenda checklists. But at the end of the day, I truly know right now that I'm giving my best self to both of these missions. And I also truly forgive myself when I know that like there are things that I'm going to fall short on, but like that's really all you can ask for from yourself and from anybody. And so it drives me because I'm so excited about the ways that we can, transform St. Louis. I'm so excited about connecting people organically and over shared interests in ways that, no current platform is doing right now. And I think that there's just a huge opportunity in both, and that makes me really excited.
No need for me to add anything to that response. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Last question that I have for you, Allison. It's a question I ask all of my guests. What is it that you want your lasting legacy to be?
I think at the core of everything that I do in my life, it comes down to connection. I love making people feel connected to others, to themselves, to whatever it is that fills them, their passions, their interests, and that very clearly in my head shines through in both of the pieces of work that I'm doing with approach, connecting people, connecting people to find, a loved one, or to find friendship, or to find networking. And then in City League, it is truly at the heart of it is supporting kids to find themselves and to find out what it is that they love to do and how they can be better people. And I strongly feel like everything comes back to connection, and that's just like who I am at the core. And I love being connected to people. And the first indicator of life longevity is social connectivity, and I see that to be true in so many ways. As if you feel a connection to those people that are in your community, then your life is going to be more fulfilled.
Well, thanks for being a connection in my life that leads me to feel more fulfilled for sure. Allison, I'm
Likewise.
really grateful for our connection and the time that you've given us and for sharing your journey. I think there's a lot that our audience could take away and compare kind of notes to in terms of nonprofit approach, especially for those early stage nonprofits. So really appreciate the time that you've taken. For our audience, be sure to check out stlcityleague.com. Consider donating to the cause. Allison is just crushing it, and that's all I got. That's all I got for you. Thanks for joining, Allison.
Thank you, Puya. You've been a wonderful supporter. We should also let everybody know that you are, pending a vote on Monday, like our next board member. So we are really excited and really grateful for the work that you've done with our organization. And I'm also just really grateful to be a friend.
Likewise, Allison. Happy to be part of this incredible mission. I will talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
That wraps up episode 15. A couple of fun updates. Allison and I did get our puppies together for a play day, and they absolutely loved chasing each other around. It was super adorable. Also, the week after we recorded this episode, I was voted in to join the board at City League, which is quite the honor. I have a very personal connection to this mission as access to sports practically saved my life. Wrestling and football were the greatest and most productive escapes for me from a tumultuous home in middle and high school. Being on a mat and field gave me an arena and an outlet to let loose and develop a strong foundation of discipline, confidence, persistence, grit, and so many other qualities that serve me today. I believe, and everyone at City League believes, that every kid deserves that same opportunity. And it's a privilege to be in a position to give back and pour my heart into an organization that helps over 600 kids and growing in my community gain access to sports and those similar opportunities. I'm happy to be in a position to apply all my skills and everything that I'm learning on this podcast and beyond to help advance City League's mission to develop the next generation of youth through engagement in sports and extracurriculars. Huge shout out to Allison Cousins, founder and commissioner at City League, who turned her vision, took the initiative, and made City League a reality in St. Louis. If you're able to, consider making a small donation to the cause by going to stlcityleague.com and clicking donate. To close on a quote that I believe every nonprofit founder and socially minded individual can relate to, this one from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" Thanks for joining another episode of the Nonprofit Lab. If you found some value in this and other episodes, feel free to like, subscribe, rate, and share our podcast with others who might be interested. It really helps us out. With that, until next time, and as always, be well.